Well, there's some weird stuff about all of you. I don't know if you're aware of this, but your personalities are all a little quirky. Have you picked that up? Actually, probably your personality is not quirky. It's just the people around you who have the quirky personalities, right? We kind of grow up as the lead actor in this great play, and we think the world revolves around us so often, and we kind of think we're the way that we are, and we're the norm, and everybody else must just be having a bad day, or they're just a little strange, or let's just walk on the other side of the street when we see them, right? They're just different. Have you noticed that going through life? Not everyone is wired the same way you are. I mean, it's crazy how different we all are, the different aspects of our personality, which is a strange word that is actually not in the Bible. But when we think about our shape, when we think about our spiritual gifts and our heart and our abilities, our personality and our experiences, all of the wonder that makes us who we are, I think you'd have to say personality is a big part of our uniqueness, wouldn't you? I mean, come on, when you think about how people even interact with each other or pursue their dreams or even just have downtime, we're all wired so differently. And I like how the psalmist puts this because it really captures something critical about us. He says, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Did you get up this morning with that understanding of yourself? I praise you. Well, maybe you got up praising the Lord. That may be easy. But how about the part about I praise you because I am fearfully, which is a strange word, but if you can imagine fear as awe, I'm awesome. It says it in the Bible right there, no doubt about it. I'm awesomely and wonderfully made. Now, I'm guessing that was not your initial way to greet the day. We looked at that last week. Remember when we were looking at our abilities, and I said, what are you good at? And everybody said, nothing. And they had Eeyore, Grumpy Pants was just all over the place. Why? Because we don't have the feeling that we're great at stuff. We just don't walk up and say, yeah, I'm ready to take on the day. I mean, we just don't have that kind of mentality sometimes. And I tell you what, when it comes to our personalities, for whatever reason, we would always prefer to have somebody else's. I don't know why that is. For years, I didn't realize I was an introverted person. I get my energy from being alone or with just a few people. Boy, did I pick the wrong job. Can you imagine? It is an extroverted kind of a job. And so what I find is rather than being energized and lit up by all of the people around me, I just feel drained. Now, I'm not saying you're draining. It's the people on this side. No, I mean, it's just the way that it goes sometimes. That's just the way and for years, I thought I was an extrovert because I admired extroverted leaders. They seemed to just feed off the energy of people. They loved working in a room, meeting new people, and I learned how to do that because I thought that's what I needed to do. But boy, it wiped me out. I just had to realize that's just the way that God had wired me. I am fearfully, awesomely, wonderfully made. And that's just the way. Any other introverts in the room? Do you understand what it's like to be in a world of extroversion? Yeah. Who are the extroverts? You can raise your hand. You know who you are. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm over here. Don't miss me. That's a beautiful thing. And of course, when we think about our personalities, I think the biggest problem that we find is that sometimes people use it as a way of putting you in a box. Like, have you ever taken one of those surveys where you're like an otter or a golden retriever or Eeyore or whatever it is, You're like, oh, come on, don't fence me in, don't just say I can't do something because of my personality. And that has got to be just right top of mind when we think about the way that we're wired. Our personalities, just like our abilities or our experiences or our heart, nothing defines what God can do with us except God. So however you're wired, wherever crazy way, shape, or form God has constructed you, you can do anything that God calls you to do. I mean, I'm getting ready to go to the LCMC, the Lutheran Congregations and Mission for Christ. That's one of our Lutheran associations we're a part of. They're having their national gathering this week in Des Moines, Iowa. Woo! That's the party city, right? Am I crazy or what? That's going to be a blast. A bunch of Lutheran pastors and good time. That's right. And so get it up to I get to see all my old pastor buddies, that I've known. Some of them are just for years and years. And I look at them all, and there's not one that's the same. I used to think there was kind of a pastor type And maybe you've thought that too over the years, but I just am not seeing it. When I go look at all the weirdos that I'm going to hang out with this week, they're all incredibly, some of them are extroverts, some are introverts, some are big picture, some are right in the details, some are procrastinators, some are insane planners. I mean, they're all just wired so differently, and yet they were all called into the ministry to serve churches. I mean, it's incredible as you see the variety. And then you multiply that by a gazillion and get all of the other people on the earth, not just the pastors, but everybody. We're all different in every way, but we can't let us be pigeonholed. And just because you're an introvert. Did you know Robin Williams was an introvert? I mean, was there anybody ever more bombastic or crazy on stage when you think about Robin Williams? And of course, that was a big part of, I think, some of his internal suffering is kind of that disconnect that he had and that anxiety and all of that. But when I think about the things that we can do, we don't want our personality to hold us back. Any left-handers in the room? Yeah, you know you're special. You're like, yeah, I'm proud of myself. Any right-handers in the room? That'd be the rest of us, I guess, yeah. Anybody super ambidextrous? Not me. I can barely throw with my right hand, let alone. Some of you are incredible at that. But what I found when it comes to my personality is it really is a little bit like right and left-handedness. I may be an introvert. That's where I get my energy from, and I'm a right-handed introvert, but that doesn't mean that there's not part of me that loves the extroverted part of myself. It's a preference that I have, but it's not exclusive. It doesn't mean I can't meet new people. It doesn't mean I'm a wallflower or I'm shy or all the kind of negative things that we say about introverts, right? Or if I tend to be kind of a big picture thinker. That's just the way God wired me. I'm always thinking about the 50,000-foot view. I'm not a detail-oriented person. If you know me, you know, yeah, Greg, we know. So thank God some of you are, because otherwise we'd be in a world of hurt. But some of you are exactly that way. That's just the way God, but it's a preference. Does it mean I never have to balance my checkbook? Yes, that's exactly what it means. No, it means sometimes we have to do things that we're not, that don't come as easily for us, but they're just stuff that has to get done. It's a preference, the way that we make decisions, the way that we live life, whatever it is. And so when it comes to your personality, it's really good to know who you are, because it will help you deal with people who are radically different from you. You know, with my wife and I tend to be kind of a last-minute person. She tends to be more of a planner. Now, thank God I found someone like that, because we kind of complement each other. You know, she's gotten more spontaneous over the years, and I've stayed just the same. Never mind. That didn't really change. But hopefully I've gotten a little more planning. It's definitely a planning kind of a world, isn't it? But if we didn't know that about each other, think of all the fights that we've had. And I could list them, right? We had a lot of conflict over that, or even the way that I like to make decisions. I tend to do it with my kind of cold calculating logic. Any big thinkers out there? That's just the way that you make a pro and con chart. You know, you just kind of decide based on, well, let's think of the money, let's think of and that's just kind of the way that whereas my wife, she's much more of a feeler. That doesn't mean she doesn't have a brain, doesn't mean she can't work with charts and spreadsheets. It just means when it comes to making a decision, she's going to think about the human cost. She's going to go with her gut and her heart. Now, all of us do both of those every day? It'd be crazy if we didn't think about stuff. It'd be crazy if we didn't kind of listen to our gut, but most of us have a preference in that area. And when you run into someone with a different preference, boy, do you have some potential conflict. And all across the body of Christ, all across the human race, we see people not getting along. And so much of it is because they're just wired a little bit differently. When the psalmist rather, oh no, it is David, look at that. When David says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And he lists all the places that you could get away from God. He says, nope, none of those seem to work. Why? Because God is everywhere. He's the one that created this massive diversity of humanity with all of our strange little quirks. And could you imagine? We would put psychologists and therapists out of business if we just understood, hey, that's just the way that God has made me, right? And we just kind of accept. Now, not everything about us is perfect. We're sinful, broken human beings, and there's some parts of our personality that we want to grow away from or live into our best selves or whatever you want to say. But could you imagine all the shrinks that wouldn't have jobs? You know, someone once said, how many shrinks does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it's only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. Oh, that's pretty bad. But the guy that goes into the shrink's office and the reception calls into the doctor, says, someone, they need to see you right away. The guy out here in the lobby, he thinks he's invisible. And the doctor says, well, tell him I can't see him right now. See? That's all I got. There's no more. Wild applause. Wild applause. How about this in verse 16? Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. David speaks about even in the womb, God is taking stock of who we are, crafting each and every one of us into what we're going to be, whether it's our personality, whether it's our physical form, whether it's whatever it is. God is not unaware of us, even in the deepest parts of the earth, in the deepest parts of our moms, whatever it might be. God is present. And he goes on, he says, your eyes beheld my unformed son. In your book were written for me all the days that were formed, when none of them as yet existed. See, it's like we're on a path living life, and God is fully aware of how all of that fits together. He knows every day as it comes. Does that mean we're just a bunch of robots on a track? No, there's all kinds of free will choices. That's a whole strange conundrum to try to wrap your head around predestination and free will. But God puts us onto this earth and lets us run with how he created us. He knows we're going to bump into each other like pinballs. He knows we're going to, not click with certain people. We're going to be like, oh man, that's the most difficult person in the world to deal with. Why is that? Because there are opposites in so many of these kind of personality tendencies. And yet God just lets us all go and do our thing. Why? Because he loves to see this kind of interactive stuff. He loves to see what will become. Just like if you've got kids, you love to see them grow up and all the little nuances of how they think and what they do. I mean, my son, we always joke that he's our one extrovert raised by wolves, because he is the friendly, outgoing person. He's always out meeting people. He just has never met a stranger because he's just so friendly. And all of us have been trying to learn from him how to do that a little bit. Now, what are some of your people skills? Are you more of an extroverted person? Are you more of an introvert? Are you out there all for the world to see? Are you a little bit more reserved? Do you make decisions thinking about the needs of people as your top priority and the relationships involved? Or you tend to be a little bit more clinical in the way that you kind of are wired? I mean, that affects our kind of interactions with each other. Now, there's lots of ways we can love each other. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is give a fairly clinical, this is the facts, ma'am. This is the way it is. This is tough love. That's the way that it has to come across at times. And other times it's no. Let's just get down and weep together and holding it. Just show that affection when we need it. I don't need a bunch of words right now. I just need a hug. I mean, look, we all know that we're all wired differently. And yet when we don't grasp that, or we assume that everybody should just make way because I've got the right personality, then all of a sudden we find ourselves not accomplishing our mission. Because parts of our personality really help us or harm us when it comes to interacting with each other, and it also helps us or harms us when it comes to our purpose. We don't want to get pigeonholed, we don't want to get put in a box, but certainly we don't want to not accomplish what God has placed before us because of quirks in our personality. Even though I'm more of a big picture person, any kind of big picture person, you look at the forest rather than the trees. Yeah, that's just the way some of us like to see things. But we never accomplish anything if we didn't have detail-oriented people around us to really help decide, hey, what's going on? Or all the detailed people, they'd be in a world of hurt if they were, well, the expression I've always heard in terms of leadership and management. Have you heard that before? That the manager is the one in the tree cutting business that's constantly sharpening the saws, effectively creating schedules so that they can cut down the most trees in the most hours and all of that. And the leader is the one that kind of calls up to the tallest tree and says, hey, I think we're in the wrong forest, right? Some of us, we need both of those, right? And if we can only do one, then we're going to be walking around like with one of our arms behind our back. That's no way to live. So we say, Lord, would you increase my ability to do the thing I'm not good at, even as you magnify the thing that I am fearfully and wonderfully created to do. We need to kind of work on both sides of that. In fact, how many of you run into someone that is clearly hampered in one of these areas? Maybe they're a massive introvert to the point where they can't even hold a conversation, or they don't ever leave their house, right? I mean, it's a paralyzing kind of introversion. That's no way to live. Or if you've been around extroverts that don't know how to shut up. I know that's redundant, but no, I'm just kidding. That was rude, so rude. But what was my point? My point was we I never tire of making fun of extroverts. It's like some people golf. That's what I do. I just make fun of extroverts. So forgive me, extroverts. Cut me a little slack. I know you will because you love me. But when we think about the things that would hamper us, one of the things God does is He brings us into the family of faith so that we can kind of learn for each other. Most of us do not marry people who are exactly like us. Thank you, Jesus. Isn't that right? We tend to be attracted to people because they are different from us, because they're better at things than we are in certain areas. That's one of the things that draws us in. Now, if you marry your exact a clone, that would be just a little bit strange. I mean, some people do that, and in various ways, and what have you. I once ran into, did we find any procrastinators in the room? Any last-minute people? Yeah. So I ran into a dear friends of ours. They're both procrastinators. I mean, like to the max. Like they don't plan. They just do. They just kind of live in the moment by the seat of their pants, and it makes them incredibly flexible. They could pick up and move at a moment's notice. They can just, nothing seems to faze them. I mean, they just have some amazing skills together as a couple. But can you imagine the places where they fall down? I mean, it's just, and some of you are just the opposite. You're both of you are major planners. I've seen some of your garages, and I know how organized everything is, and how my wife lusts after those garages because she is a very organized person. And when you look at our garage, it does not reflect that. It reflects like the ninth circle of hell, I think is kind of the way we would describe just chaos abounding and terror. Yeah, that's right. We're bringing up some marital squabbles here together. I love it. But when we think about our purpose, some of the ways that we get involved is we get this tension in churches between pioneers and settlers. Now, if you think of the way the West was won, right? These pioneers would just set out into brand new territory, and of course, we just destroyed Native American tribes and all kinds of awful things that happened over the course of our history as a country. But when you just think about the fun Westerns of old, they're just kind of going over the next hill, and wouldn't it be a tragedy if the settlers had not come up behind those pioneers and built cities and railroads and indoor plumbing and libraries and streetlights and eventually all the things that we come to take for granted as civilization? Well, who does our culture celebrate, pioneers or settlers? The Marlboro Man, right? The pioneers, right? The lone stranger out on the prairie, right? Taking on the bad guys. That's who all of our movies are celebrating. That's the hero of just about every story. But not every country in the world is like that. You go into England and you say, what does they sell? They celebrate settledness. They celebrate building things up, making them better, developing things so that they reach a level of perfection. They don't celebrate the kind of rogue Han Solo type, that's out just doing things on the frontier. Whereas here in America, that is big. Well, what do we need? We need both of those in our world, don't we? We need the entrepreneurs, but we also need the smart spreadsheet people, right? If we don't have both of those, well, the business is not going to succeed. Same with the body of Christ. We need all of your quirky personalities. If we don't have you, we are going to be less in the way that we operate. That's one of the reasons we're spending so much time understanding ourselves so that we can put ourselves into ministries, into areas where we will bless all kinds of folks. And we won't be able to do that if we don't kind of understand where you and I are coming from. If you've had some conflict with people, we got to figure out how to be in the world with our strange, wonderfully, fearfully, awesomely made personalities. If you feel like your vision that God has given you for your life, the stuff that you are called to do, if you're not able to get that done in our particular body of Christ because of whatever reasons, red tape or not enough money or I don't know what it would be, we got to work on that. We got to have the pioneers that eat change for breakfast that are kind of pushing us over the next horizon, saying we can't just stay here because God is calling us to expand the kingdom. But we also need those settler developers that really make things run the way that they're intended to. Otherwise, it's just going to be a crazy town of change and upheaval and stress. In fact, you see that in churches. We've worked with lots of churches over the years, and we found that when the pioneers get too far ahead of the settlers, they start to break apart, and eventually you get these ugly factions of people who are stuck in the past, and they're just putting on the brake and throwing out the anchor and trying to slow things down as quick. And the pioneers, they're just leaving everyone in the dust, saying, if you don't like it, well, just stay in the dust then. And they just kind of, and can you imagine? That's just not a fun place to be. And it's caused a lot of tension over the years in lots of different churches that we've worked with. But when the teams get together, when the crazy pioneers and the settlers and the developers, when they all kind of work in the same partnership, when they decide, hey, we're on the same mission together, and we may be going at different paces, we may have different roles, and our personalities may adjust in different ways, but we are all on the same team. Can you imagine if the offense looked at the defense and a football team and just said, we don't really need you guys anymore. There's probably a Charger joke in there somewhere, but we just won't make it. We'll just leave that to it. But when we understand that we all play these different parts, then we just got to look around and say, who's been on the bench too long? Who's not been fully realizing their gifts for ministry, whether it's their spiritual gifts or their that passion, that heart that we talked about, or even just the raw abilities that we're wired with, or things that we've learned, or certainly the quirks in our personality. We got to say, no, now's the time for you to come in to the game. These are minutes we need you to be playing because you got what it takes. Now, some of these things are totally obvious. Like if you're working the greeter table and you don't like people, I wonder why we're not growing. Maybe there's something. Every time someone comes in and says, you don't belong here, that's probably not what we're looking for in the greeting ministry, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't, even if that's not the way we're wired, even if we would prefer to not be meeting new people, we have a left hand, right? We can still learn how to grow in that area. Maybe that's something that we want to do. I mean, that's just the simplest of examples, ushering and all these kind of different roles on Sunday morning. But what if there are whole ministry areas that God has called you to really pioneer and push forward, that kind of apostolic entrepreneurial energy that sometimes is stamped down in churches over the years? What if that's you and you just haven't felt released in that, and now all of a sudden we don't have this whole thing that God could be doing, whether it's our knitting or our Stephen ministry or all the millions of things that the women do. I mean, all the countless ministries around here. Somebody at some point said, oh, I think God is calling me to move that along. Maybe that's you and you haven't had a chance for whatever reason. I mean, what a disaster that would be. I love how David wraps up the psalm. He's definitely not too big for his britches in all of this. He's speaking about how important, even if he ran from God, he couldn't get away. At the end of our reading, it says, I try to count them, meaning the thoughts that God has for us. He says they are more than this. I come to the end, and I'm still with you. That's so important. When we come to the end of ourselves and we realize, hey, I am not sufficient. I am not enough without all of my brothers and sisters in the faith. I'm not going to be able to do what God has called me to do without all of these folks helping me out. And there's some things that are going to weigh me down, some things that are going to mess me up, some things that are going to derail what God would want to do in me and through me. And so I think that could be why he wraps up the entire psalm. We didn't read this earlier. It's a really long psalm, but he ends with this word, search me, O God, and know my heart. Have you prayed that before? It's a great prayer. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Maybe we could just take a moment as we move into our time of communion to ask God to search our hearts. See if there's any wicked way in us that needs to be set aside, that we might walk in this way everlasting.